This could be the biggest gamble in Porsche's history. It's the new version of its best-selling car, the Macan, only this one has a very big difference. You see, it is all electric. There's not an ICE version in sight, and that makes climbing into an entry-level version more expensive than it's ever been before. Still, you could argue that original Cayenne was something of a gamble too, and we all know how that one played out. So will this bold shift help or hinder the Macan in Australia? And is this the country's best electric SUV? There's only one way to find out.
The Macan arrives with 4 trim levels: the entry-level Macan, the Macan 4, Macan 4S, and then the flagship Macan Turbo. The latter, of course, just being a name Porsche now applies to its go-fast models. Obviously, there isn't an actual turbo in sight. The new electric range opens with the Macan, which lists at $128,400. A reminder here that the old entry-level Macan with an ICE powertrain would have set you back less than 6 figures, so this one does represent quite the jump. Now, it should also be pointed out that you can still buy the previous generation ICE Macan, at least until supplies run dry. The brand isn't getting any more, but suggests there are enough in the country to satisfy demand until around Q2 next year. Next comes the 4, which is $134,400 and adds a second E-motor. Then comes the 4S, yours for $149,300, before the range tops out with the Turbo, which climbs all the way up to $184,400. Now, those are big numbers, but at least Australian delivered cars are some of the best specified on the planet. That starts with the Macan, which gets a 12.6-inch digital instrument cluster, a second 10.9-inch central touchscreen with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. It rides on 20-inch alloys, has leatherette seats that are heated up front, and Australian cars get things like the clever Porsche Active Suspension Management System as standard. Next up is the Macan 4, which adds a second electric motor, but which otherwise largely mirrors the base car's spec. Next on the list is the 4S, which rides on a different 20-inch alloy, gets LED matrix headlights, rocks a better Bose stereo, a panoramic roof, and 4-zone climate control. Finally, the Turbo is the big dog of the electric Macan range, packing serious power, but also arriving with its own 20-inch alloy design, with 21-inch wheels a no-cost option, an augmented reality head-up display, and things like the Porsche Electric Sport Sound, the Sport Chrono package, and a performance-focused Sport Plus drive mode, all appearing as standard. In my opinion, the Macan Electric does look sharp, all aerodynamic and swept back, just like a range-maximising electric SUV should. But there's also functional method to all this swoopiness as well. The headlights look as though they've been chiselled into the bodywork, and at the grille, you'll find active venting to help with cooling when needed. There's also a sizable front splitter, which looks very much like the Macan is sticking out its jaw, all of which assist with aero and range. It's also a 2 charging port layout with access left and right, though the latter is AC charging only, while on the left, you get both.
So step inside the Macan Turbo, and I gotta say you're greeted by a very familiar but very nice feeling space. I especially like this twin screen setup. Everything is super clear and it's very easy to use. Ignore the third screen. That's a $2,700 option. I just can't see that many people ticking it just to keep their passengers happy. And I also love this aircon control system. Not only is everything right at hand, but it takes feedback to the next level. When you hit a button, literally the entire panel drops in and comes back out again. But there are a couple of quirks in here, I reckon. And one of them is that, don't forget, this is an almost $200,000 car, and some of the plastics just feel a bit hard and scratchy for a vehicle at that price point. And there are a few ergonomic quirks as well. So the USB ports are under here, for example. I can tell you from experience, it's very hard to get at them through these little gaps. You need to go through the middle, which of course you can't do if anything is in these 2 deep cup holders. So a couple of quirks that don't seem that well thought out, but overall it is a very lovely space. Back seat of the Macan, and in this case the Turbo, and I'm 175 centimeters. As you can see, I've got enough knee room and I've got enough headroom to sit pretty comfortably. Though I've got to point out that because this protrudes so much, I just can't see you getting a third adult-sized human in the back here, at least not comfortably. Now, elsewhere you do get aircon controls with temp controls and vents and twin USB charge ports, and there are 2 little bottle holders hidden in each door. And if you do decide to ditch the middle passenger, which would be my advice, you can pull down the seat divider to find 2 extra cup holders. Now, there is some kind of open sesame magic at play here in the Macan, and it starts at the front where, giving it a kind of loving caress, we'll get the bonnet to open. That reveals an 84-litre storage frunk, and yes, you can give the charging ports a little tickle and they'll open as well. But if you're not the kind of person who likes to rub their car in public, you can also just open it using the key. Now, the Macan's boot is a little bit more traditional. No amount of fondling gets this to open magically. Instead, there's a bit of a hidden button. The boot opens to reveal 480 litres of storage with the rear seats in place, and honestly, it's a flat-bottomed, wide, and really usable looking space.
The entry-level Macan is equipped with a single rear-mounted electric motor, and it will make a total 250 kilowatts or 265 kilowatts with launch control activated and 563 newton meters, which is enough to push the cheapest Macan to 100 kilometers an hour in 5.7 seconds. The 4 then adds a second electric motor for all-wheel drive, upping the grunt to 285 kilowatts or 300 kilowatts with the launch function and 650 newton meters, and drops the sprint to a brisk 5.2 seconds. Now, the 4S is probably going to be the performance sweet spot, with its dual motor setup generating 330 kilowatts or 380 kilowatts in launch and 820 newton meters, unlocking a blistering sprint of just 4.1 seconds.
But this one is the big boy of the Macan range. It's the turbo, which means 430 kilowatts or 470 kilowatts if you've got launch control engaged, and 1130 newton meters, and a sprint to 100 kilometers an hour that rivals a Carrera Cup race car. It is astonishingly quick. Now, it's got twin motors, all-wheel drive, and really the kind of brutal performance. It gives you this kind of mini facelift every time you press the accelerator. But before you get too excited, everything kind of slides back to where it was when your foot finds the brake again.
Every Macan is fitted with a big 100 kilowatt hour lithium-ion battery, which helps deliver really solid range, no matter which one you choose. The entry-level Macan will cover the most distance at a claimed 654 kilometers, while the 4S, and Turbo will travel 624 kilometers, 619 kilometers, or 616 kilometers, respectively. The Macan also rides on an 800-volt architecture and is set up for 270 kilowatt DC high-speed charging, which will take 21 minutes to go from 10 to 80%. It will also accept 11 kilowatt AC charging, which should take around 10 hours to go from empty to full, but it is worth noting that most home wall boxes are only around 7 kilowatts, which means a full charge would take more like 13 hours plus.
Okay, so full disclosure, we have spent most of the drive experience so far tootling around a little racetrack, doing all sorts of activities. I think the idea being that Porsche is trying to prove that this all-electric Macan is still a Porsche, even if it is an electric-only SUV. And I've got to say, it handled itself very, very well on the racetrack. Yes, it definitely does feel heavy. Yes, you can hear some complaints from the tyres, but the power is just prodigious, especially in this turbo. There's a fair bit of grip, not a lot of body roll, and it kind of disguises its weight and mass fairly well, although not entirely. But I reckon you can count on one hand the number of Macan owners who are buying this to go onto a racetrack. If you want an electric Porsche to do that with, surely you're buying a Taycan. This is surely more about family transport, although family transport with a bit of a wild edge, especially if you opt for the turbo. And in much the same way that I think the ICE Macan, the car this one replaces, really defined what it meant to be a driver's SUV, I actually think this one does the same for being an electric SUV. It's a whole heap of fun, especially on these kind of flowing country back roads where it feels far sportier than it probably has any right to, and can really put a smile on your face. But the ride definitely errs on that kind of firm side of comfy. It doesn't feel overly harsh, at least it hasn't yet, but it does feel connected to the road surface below. That said, how that translates to the potholed roads of our cities, well, that remains to be seen. You'll have to wait till we get one through the office. But as a bit of a country tourer, there's little to complain about. The steering too is predictably well weighted and direct, but I think the real party trick, especially in this turbo, is its acceleration. I'll give you an example of that now from the standing start. This is not with launch control engaged, so we're not even accessing the max power. Plant your foot and this thing lunges forward. That's 70, 80, 90, 100. Now this thing accelerates like a Porsche Carrera Cup car. That's a race car. And the fact that that kind of punch is now available on a family SUV that can be driven by anyone is really quite staggering. It goes to show what electricity is really unlocked in terms of outright performance. But there is, of course, a downside. Now, as I said, we've driven this on the racetrack and on some flowing country roads. We haven't driven it that long yet, to be honest. So again, for the full review, make sure you check back to carsguide.com.au when we'll give it the proper once-over over an entire week of living with it. But already, I can tell you that the one thing I think people will miss from the ICE versions is just that sense of excitement, that sense of occasion, that soundtrack. As competent as this is, as weaponized as this EV powertrain feels, it does feel a little bit like a tool simply going about its job rather than a sort of raucous, properly engaging driver's car. I guess the best way to describe it would be clinical rather than overly exciting. It is super competent in the way that it goes about its EV business, but it does just lack that little bit of fizz, in my opinion. But this, of course, is where a car like this is made to use all of its power. We're on a racetrack here. I'm going to put my foot down coming out of this straight. You'll be amazed at how quickly that climbs. That's already 135 before I find the brakes. Tipping again. Now, again, as I mentioned, I just can't see a lot of people using this car on a racetrack. I mean, and even the fast ones are still family-focused SUVs, right? But that said, those who do will find a very competent piece of equipment at their disposal. And in true Porsche fashion, they've kind of undersold its abilities, including its 0 to 100 kilometer an hour time. I think you can actually get it quicker. Now, there really is no disguising the weight of this car, and there are times where you're really putting the tires through a fair bit of torture as well. But my God, the power coming out of corners is just ridiculous. And the way it tips in and will just happily hold a line as you feed on the throttle is impressive as well. Now, heavy on the brakes here, a lot of stopping power in this car, which is also a good thing when you try to pull up more than 2 tons of SUV. But the real magic happens on the way out of the corners when you plant your foot. The power does seem literally endless. Incredible, incredible acceleration. And as I mentioned, the benefit of getting a little facelift every time you put your foot down. So while I don't think too many people are going to find their way to a racetrack anytime soon, I gotta say, I can't recommend it highly enough, at least once.
Porsche Macan Electric is yet to be crash tested by ANCAP or by Euro's NCAP, but it doesn't appear to be missing any key equipment from its safety list. That includes curtain airbags that extend all the way to the boot, AEB with pedestrian detection, lane keeping assist, a surround view camera, and intersection assist. The Porsche ownership experience is frankly underwhelming by modern standards, with the brand offering just a 3-year unlimited kilometre warranty, plus an 8-year 160,000 kilometre battery warranty. The positive, though, is that servicing should only be required every 2 years or 30,000 kilometres. You can also buy a prepaid service plan for 3, 4 or 5 years, priced at $1,495, $2,795 or $2,995.
If you're into electric SUVs, there's little doubting that the Porsche Macan is a predictably good one. But the big question is, are enough people into electric SUVs to keep the Macan sales bubbling along in Australia? And interestingly, a bit like the Taycan, I actually don't reckon it's worth spending the money on the turbo. I think the real magic here lies around the middle of the range. Now remember, this is just a sample of the Macan Electric. So for my full review, check out carsguide.com.au.